Hello, everybody. Lovely to connect again. Hello, Michael. Welcome. How are you?
Oh, I'm very well, Jacqui. I'm very well. So a big cheerio to you and a big cheerio to all our listeners. Um, and before we make a start, Jacqui, I'd just like to um, congratulate you and pass on some beautiful feedback I've been getting over the last few weeks that I've sort of seemed to have dropped off the scene, but everyone's oohing and ahhing, and your daughter's so beautiful and she's so intelligent, and she sort of steers the ship nicely, and all the rest of it. So well done to you. I agree with all the saying, but there's been some beautiful comments from people who I value highly and whatever. And if they're passing on comments like that, especially in your regard, that's high praise, in what we call high praise indeed. So well
Oh,
done,
beautiful.
Jacqui.
Thank you. And thank you, those listening that are sharing nice sentiments. Right back at you. We're delighted, thrilled to put this together and share, and lovely to have you join. And we're thrilled that it's useful. So thank you for the feedback.
Yeah, yeah, it's all beautiful. So for the listeners then, today's podcast begins with part one of chapter 10, um, titled The Divine Manifestations or the Glories. So manifestations, glories means the same. It's manifestations mean coming into some form of existence, whether it's a description or some way that we connect with this divine essence, what we call Brahman or consciousness or the absolute. We've got to relate it in our everyday language, don't we, Jacqui? And so these are attempts to, in a limited way, through language and through the human limited human capacity, we're trying to explore and come to understand as something that's beyond the human capabilities. Um, but nevertheless, it's the only means we've got of doing that. And eventually, the understanding, the intellectual understanding that we're gaining in these podcasts and through these discussions and material that people are reading, will eventually draw us closer and closer as we let go of our false identification with our mortal aspect and identify more strongly with our immortal, our spiritual or soul aspect. And then comes that what's called spiritual experience, when the connection's made. So it transcends the thinking mind and the human limited sort of capacities that a human has got. All right. So we've already looked at 2 or 3 chapters, and we've got this one and then 2 more after that. So, like when we first started, we're talking about ourselves, through Arjuna, and we all relate to ourselves pretty clearly in many ways. But we learned through there how to stop identifying with ourselves incorrectly, which we'd been doing for many lifetimes, and focusing more on getting some teachings from Krishna, and we could change that. But even though everyone, certainly everyone listening to these podcasts has got some understanding of this higher entity, which we call the higher self or God or, whatever term you like, it's a very limited understanding that we've sort of accumulated along the way. So these 6 chapters are designed to give us all a more detailed and, even though it's intellectual, but a clearer understanding of what this actual higher self is. And remembering that it's not separate from us. We've got that higher self within us, but we sort of not really so certain at this stage. So we're relating it to someone out there, like a Krishna or a Brahman or God or the consciousness. All right, Jacqui?
It's beautiful, rich material. Like, gee, here we were just talking a moment ago between ourselves. We're like sort of halfway through or just over halfway through. But in a way, we're just starting to get into the chunkiness, even though we've covered so many great topics and sentiments already. Like,
Yeah,
I'm excited.
yeah. Oh, I'm excited too, and it's about the 4th time I'm teaching it, but it continues to be exciting because, it's the most exciting thing in anyone's existence. Um, but yeah, wait till we get to the last 6 chapters, when we connect the first 6 chapters of our mortal self-understanding with these current 6 chapters, with we're doing a deeper understanding of the divine self, and then we start merging over the last 6 chapters, the two together. So as I said right at the start, it builds on itself, and by the end of the 40 podcasts, I'm sure all the listeners will know it'll have had a profound effect on them one way or another, and to their benefit, to everyone's benefit. All right, Jacqui, I'll continue on. So we continue the theme of the 6 chapters that we're currently exploring, and that is the nature of the imperishable Brahman, and it being the source of all of the manifested world, that is the entire creation. So this Brahman that we're looking at, or higher source, is the cause of all this world, and not only does it bring it about, but it also sustains it all through its duration of this creation. And in the end, it'll bring about the dissolution of it as well. So it begins it, sustains it, and dissolves it. This is a simple indication of how powerful this energy force is. With what's already been revealed to Arjuna and us, he nevertheless still stands aghast at the outstanding knowledge and personality of his friend Krishna. He asks how Krishna, the personification of Brahman, manifests himself. So what we'll be looking at here is how to experience a world of differences. The difference between the mortal world and the immortal world. And I'll put a little sort of saying here that through greater wisdom, a person does not see a different world. He just sees the world differently. So this is really critical, Jacqui and listeners, for us to understand all the work that we're doing. We all entertain the idea of changing things in the creation. We want to change, to some extent or other, our husbands or wives. We might love them, but they've got some imperfections, so we want to sort those out, don't we? Same with our children, same with our friends, and same with our parents or in-laws, same with our work colleagues, same with, the whole world. And we come to understand eventually that's futile. You can only change yourself. That's the only capability anyone has. You can have some influence on others, that notion of let your light shine, encourage them, teach them through your own example, all those sorts of things. But in the end, each person chooses which path they're going to go down. Yeah, they can either accept some of your advice or totally disregard it. It's up to them. Yeah, we don't have any direct influence in that regard. So this is critical that we understand that, because a lot of people want to change the world. Now, it's this beautiful saying that if you want whatever change you want to see in the world, bring that change about in you. Yeah. So it's that reference to make you the starting point. And the exercise for the week is going to centre on this little this concept that I'm outlining at the moment. But of course, I'll refer to that at the end. So just to reread that. Through greater wisdom, a person does not see a different world. He just sees the world differently. And another way of describing that simply, Jacqui and listeners, is the reference we all understand and often use is how we look at the world through rose-coloured glasses or whatever coloured glasses. So if you're a jealous inclined sort of person, you'd be looking at the world through what's called green-coloured glasses, wouldn't you? Like that's the colour we associate with jealousy. If you're a positive and optimistic person, you look at the world through pink-coloured glasses. People in a dark place see the world through dark-coloured glasses, a lot of blackness and so on. So it's the individual that sees the world. And as we start changing, listeners, Jacqui, we might say, oh, the world's different, it's better, or this or that. The world's always been the same as it was, but we're seeing it differently. See, the change is in us, not in the world. Does that make sense, Jacqui?
Makes a lot of sense. I'm just thinking to myself, I saw an example of human behavior in this past week, which was, really interesting. I won't go into all the detail, but essentially a person getting upset over something and people sort of rushing in to support and console or whatever. But I just had a moment of clarity watching this person and the comments and everything unfold, just thinking, I see exactly what's at play here. And they didn't mean it. They weren't creating a drama they weren't thinking to themselves, let's consciously create a drama and display this behavior. They were just doing what they were doing. But it was like this moment of clarity for me just shone on the entire situation, and I could see every dynamic at play and just thought, oh, kind of feel for that person because this is happening for them and that's why they're displaying this way and everyone's rushing in to console. And it was just this interesting moment where I just thought, I feel so grateful to be able to see this situation so clearly. I know what's going on here at almost every level. It was only just a small everyday experience, like nothing in that experience so profound, except my realization that I could see great clarity in it.
Well, that's what's profound about it, Jacqui. Again, you've nailed it, what people are saying about you and what I say about you. You've come in at exactly the right time. This isn't rehearsed, listeners. This is just spontaneous. She didn't know I was going to be talking about seeing the world differently, and here she's describing an incident that took place. That is very profound, Jacqui, and it's exactly what this teaching's saying. That the reason you could sit back and be what's called the observer, and you could see clearly all the emotions and the person being distraught and other people comforting. We're not saying good, right, or whatever, just that's the situation. These are all the situations amongst 8 billion people on the planet, all in all different countries, from North Pole to South Pole, anywhere. It's constantly playing out. And once upon a time, you would have been one of the people that jumped in there, for example. And it's not to say that the people who are comforting shouldn't have been comforting. No, not at all. It just, but if you're going to be in that role, do it in a observer role. Otherwise, you're going to get hooked up in it emotionally or intellectually, mentally, and then it'll drag you into the scenario. But I'm sure listeners would have heard that there was total freedom in your recounting of that story, in that it had no impact on you. And this is what the teaching should do. It doesn't make you cold-hearted or anything. It just means you stay calm, and in that state, you're operating from your higher self, and you'll know what to say or what not to say, what to do, what not to do. Whereas otherwise, you can just be hopping around like a lot of other people often hop around in those sorts of situations. Yeah, it's that notion of keeping your head while everyone else around you is losing theirs. So that was a beautiful example, Jacqui. And it does sound a bit simple in a sense, but in another sense, it's very, very profound for the person, to any person, you or anyone else. And I'm sure most of our listeners are capable and could give us instances of that if we're in a group, for example, and people were sharing. But it's very important, and it's exactly what's being referred to in this great teaching. Well done. All right, so I'll continue on. So as individuals, we often experience sorrow and tragedy in our lives. Krishna tells us to use these opposites as opportunities towards bliss. And your example is exactly what I'm reading out now. Man gets bound to worldly existence coloured by his mental and emotional views or beliefs. Krishna's teachings in the Gita show us how the true vision of the world can liberate us. And again, exactly what you were saying. You stood back, you observed, there was no need for you to get involved, and you saw clearly all the emotional, mental, whatever actions of the person or the people playing out. So that's a lot of clarity that's there for you and for anyone that's in that sort of position. And so Krishna continues to stress the continuous practice of meditation. So if you're going to be the observer, like I said that you were in that situation, Jacqui, there has to be stillness in there. And although you weren't practicing, you didn't have your mantra, you didn't sit down and say, I'm meditating, but you're in what I've referred to on many occasions in these podcasts, you're in a meditative state. So the mind was still, the emotions were still, and that's what's called a meditative state, your higher state, that's buddhi operating, and you saw clearly what was taking place. All right. Lovely. So Krishna now specifically focuses on explaining how, knowing his supreme nature, the wise can attain him. If we don't know anything about the supreme nature, listeners, what are we sort of doing? How do we get to know the supreme nature? So as I mentioned earlier, first we get to know it through discussions like we're having now, intellectual, reading the Gita or watching a podcast on it, that sort of stuff. But eventually we need to transcend into a higher state, and the only way we truly know it is through direct contact, which is called self-realization or enlightenment. So recognizing his devotion and delight to learn, this is about Arjuna, and that's us. Yeah. So Krishna's delighted with us because we've got a strong desire to learn and understand all these teachings. So recognizing his devotion and delight to learn, he says to Arjuna, and all teachers try to encourage their students, don't they? Yeah. So listen to these beautiful words. They apply to us. Listen carefully, O mighty armed warrior, as I explain the supreme knowledge of self to benefit you on your spiritual journey. So they're words to us, Jacqui, you, me, all our listeners. He's saying, I know you're listening. I know you're interested. And he says, you're a mighty armed warrior. In other words, we're getting the equipment, the knowledge, the stillness, the meditation, putting it into practice, all of these things, which is making us strong, mighty armed. We can do this battle. We can fight it, and we can not only fight it, but ultimately come out victors. So that's the whole teachings of the Gita, right from the battlefield beginning to where it'll end. So Krishna now elaborates in great detail some of his divine manifestations and glories. So he spells them out here clearly for us to understand. Only a minor amount of them, but we can get from that that'll eventually include everything in the entire creation. So Krishna, he states, I am unborn and without beginning, the Lord of all creation, the source of all. Neither the gods nor the great sages know me in origin, for I am the source from which the gods and the sages came. He then outlines how he exists in ordinary humans. By describing some of their qualities, which all have their origin in him. So he's now talking directly about how he is in us, Jacqui. Here's some examples, listeners. He says that these are some of your qualities that you've got that come from me. For example, wisdom, buddhi, discrimination, understanding, forgiveness, truth, self-control, peace of mind, and control over ego. They all have their origins in this higher source. You can't have control over your ego just because you say, I'm going to have control over my ego. There's something that's behind that. Yeah. You got to have the intention to do that, but you can't do it without the source behind it. Is that clear, Jacqui? Yeah.
It is clear. Gee, I'm almost thinking, I mean, the ego could have fun and games with that in itself, couldn't it? That last point, like, watch me get control of,
yeah.
It could be a lot of things at play there.
Yeah. And then what would happen for people like you and me and most of our listeners is Woody would come in and quietly push ego aside and says, get thee behind me, Satan. I'm the one who's in charge of this being, not you. Yeah. But you got to know what your buddhi is, don't you? And we'll talk about the buddhi in later on, and particularly I'll draw attention to the lady that, wrote to you and asked, what does your dad mean, the buddhi's the soul and so on. And you asked about it in a recent podcast as well. So there'll be a little bit more detail on that. But this is how it all gets cleared up as we go along. You hear it different ways, different angles, and so on. So he says, as well as all, so he says, all of these higher qualities that you're aware of or becoming aware of, I'm behind all of those. And that's just a few samples. Then he says, I'm also in all of the dualities that exist within you. Pleasure and pain, birth and death, honor and dishonor, heat and cold, happiness and sadness, and so on. So all of those dualities, all of those opposites that 8 billion, that example you shared with that person in some sort of strife and other people helping, these were the sort of qualities that you were observing. Behind it all is consciousness. It was playing out in you being the still observer. It was playing out in the person that was distraught, and was playing out in the people who were offering comfort. All the same source, helping in all those different, being behind all those different occasions. And also just in using more just general broad terms, it's behind your charity, your generosity, and so on, your non-violence, your equanimity, your contentment, perseverance in spiritual discipline, and so on. So if you're recognizing you're putting in an effort, you're on the spiritual journey, well, understand, yes, that is your journey that you're on, but you couldn't be on it if it wasn't for the consciousness allowing you to explore those areas. Well, okay.
Beautiful.
So these are just some of my godly attributes, he tells Arjuna, in human beings arising from me. Just a brief sample. But I think we can glean from that, can't we, that it's another 10 or 50 or 100 that instantly come to mind. That they all come, everything comes, what we're wanting to ascertain and understand clearly, everything comes from this one source. And you can call it many things. Yeah. God the Father, Brahman, Lord Brahman, consciousness, the absolute, the source, pure love. It doesn't matter. I don't get worried about it, and people shouldn't either. If you're too hooked up on one particular word and you insist it's got to be that, well, then it's going to lead you into wars with the other words and conflict and all sorts of stuff. All of those come in at a lesser value. On a higher note, people should be able to understand that it's all the same entity, and we're allowed to call it different names in different parts of the world or whatever it might be.
Mm.
So I'm hoping I've stressed it on many occasions, Jacqui and listeners, and I'm hoping everyone's really got that clear by now.
I feel like they will have. We've touched on it many times. Even just really quickly, a side story. I remember many years ago meeting a man who was a yoga teacher, and I was asking him, "Oh, how did you find spirituality? You know, what was sort of your way into that?" And he just sort of looked at me horrified, and he says, "Oh, I'm not spiritual." And I just said, "Oh," and I knew he read a lot of yoga textbooks, and actually knew he was an incredibly intelligent man. And I just said, "Oh, that's interesting. What's sort of your sort of philosophy or understanding behind the yoga practice?" And we went on to have a very, very lovely, quite in-depth conversation for a good half hour or so. And at the end of that conversation, we both realized we actually had a very, very shared outlook and understanding on what I term spirituality, but he just hated that word and had an entirely different way of describing or seeing it. But it was one of those lovely moments where you just realize, oh, language at times can be such a barrier, because if we didn't actually go in and have that bigger conversation, we might have just thought we were poles apart in this practice and that we approached it from a very different perspective, when in essence, it was the same approach. We just had entirely different terminology for things.
Well, there's an example of what I'm saying that people ought to avoid and should avoid. I don't agree really with, like he's entitled to say I'm not spiritual, and I don't like saying that. But to me, it's an untrue and incorrect statement. Um, but I'm not don't want to go into that. But just
No, could be a can of worms, but
putting
yeah.
it out there that it just goes against this tenet of being hooked up on words, which is totally egoic, and by definition, then it's not true. So whether the person says, Jacqui, and I've got no interest, in argy-bargy or having a discussion with him, but a person that's adamant that they're not spiritual. But you say that when you had discussions with him, you realised that he actually was. Well, that's just ego saying, I don't want to make out that I'm spiritual or something. It's pretty nonsensical, and it's not true. If through his understanding and his actions he is spiritual, well, he shouldn't be worried about saying he's spiritual or denying so vigorously that he's not spiritual. It's like saying I'm not godly, because I don't like the word God. Anyway, as I say, we'll leave it at that. But just in case any of the listeners were confused, well, I don't agree with someone saying something like that. Not that it doesn't matter whether I agree or not, but I feel it's not a correct or a true statement. So he says these are just some of the attributes, godly attributes in human beings arising from me. And he says, as well as this, Krishna further elaborates how through his will, yeah, and there's that notion of thy will be done, not my will, the higher will and the lower will. So we'll get into that a bit more as the sessions go on. So he says, Krishna further elaborates how through his will were born the seven great seers or sages. So he's talking about now more in the broader and deeper, like what we'd call the astral realm, the realm beyond even, which most people struggle to get their heads around in the realm of the creation, the manifest aspect. There's another realm, what's called the godly realm or the spiritual realm or the astral realm or so on. And so he's referring here that there's different levels and different beings in charge of different aspects of that. So he says out of consciousness as well come these seven great sages or seers who are symbolic of the different planes of consciousness. Some of our listeners might be aware of the 7 levels of conscious awareness. They're like stepping stones as the person progresses on their spiritual journey. Also the groups of administrators who have been empowered to carry out the various laws of nature for the perfect functioning of the universe. So if I talk about the law of karma, and a lot of teachings do, there's a person in charge of the law of karma. It's not consciousness itself, but he delegates, if you like, authorities or powers to different entities. If there's, beings in charge of gravity, beings in charge, and in a sense, I was having a look, listeners and Jacqui, when I was having my cup of tea this morning through a magazine in today's paper at my star sign. I like to sometimes know what's going to happen with me today. And it made reference to my guardian angel. That's always sort of nice. We like guardian. Most people like guardian angels, don't they? Well, guardian angel is your Buddhi, everyone. That's your Buddhi, yeah. In book we're studying on Wednesday group, the Christ study, there's references to the Holy Spirit, the grace of God, and also the Comforter. So Buddha's your comforter. Buddha's your what gets you out of every mess you've ever got yourself into in your lifetimes. Ego's the one that puts you in. So whether you call it, again, going back to words, comforter or the grace of God or the power of the absolute or your guardian angel, it doesn't matter. Yeah. I think everyone knows that it's not someone sitting behind me and wearing a white gown and big fluffy feathers out their back. That's not your guardian angel. That's a nice drawing and it's warm and fuzzy and it's beautiful. There's nothing, no problem. But it's within you. It's called your Buddhi. It's what's looking after you from the highest source. It loves you dearly. It wants to protect you perfectly. It is capable of protecting you perfectly. So can you see how if we get stuck on words, you'd just be saying, oh, I haven't got a guardian angel. Well, I don't go around saying I've got a guardian angel, but I am talking about it, and I'm saying, yeah, I've got a guardian angel, just because there was a reference to it in my star sign, and it fits in with this bit of discussion, Jacqui. Okay?
I
All
wonder
right.
if there's 2 elements there. I mean, sorry, I know there's time ticking on, but I'm just curious, thinking if I'm sure people are going to have questions and curiosity about that.
I'm
I
sure
want,
they will.
yeah, I wonder if there's 2 elements in that. One, for many people, they don't know that higher part of themselves. Like maybe they're reading about it and learning about it in theory, but perhaps they haven't touched upon it in one of those spiritual experiences. So that's one element. We don't often, for people more on the beginner stage of the journey, they don't know their Buddhi aside from perhaps understanding a concept of it. But for those that do and understand that, I think sometimes too, even in having spiritual experiences in life, sometimes it can feel other than, as in it might feel like a past ancestor or an external source. So maybe that's why people often think of a guardian angel as something as aside from themselves, because in the moment of experiencing something like the gift of someone there behind you offering support or whatever it might be, there's a sense of otherness. And I know that's referring as well to our own state of duality, but I don't know, just feel like it's useful to touch upon those elements.
Yeah, well, I agree with all of that. I don't think you'd be disagreeing with what I'm saying that would
No.
contradict that. Again, instead of a guardian angel, you feel the comfort of um, uh, your ex-partner or your mother or, whatever. These are all valid feelings in that. And just touching on the point, you're making, Jacqui, and I understand clearly that the people listening to us or watching us are at different levels, because I've taught in groups for 30 years, and I constantly see the range of students from sort of just putting their toe in the water, their first contact. Might be coming into a cafe session or something like that, philosophy cafe session, to people who are pretty close to verging on self-realization. So for anyone that's newer to it or still early stages, please don't be disheartened with anything I'm saying. Look at it from a much more positive aspect, that what you're hearing, even if you're not understanding it crystal clear, or but you must be liking it. You must be sort of thinking that this is sounds all right. Aspire to it. So just a word of encouragement for everyone is that I'm also trying to paint a broad picture of the whole sort of teachings, the spiritual teachings of self-realization. And it's a
Which you
long,
do immensely well. And I think people are loving it. I think my commentary there was more about people's curiosity. People are deeply curious about
yeah,
this kind of thing and
yeah.
want to
Well,
understand it more so.
everyone that's curious, I love you dearly. I love you dearly. And I don't care if you're only just curious with the first letter C. I love you. Because if you're not curious, you're with the rest of the world and totally lost in the sea of ignorance, and got a lot of hardship one way or another over many lifetimes before you eventually wake up, which you will, and then make a start. So everyone who's listening to these podcasts, Jacqui, or watching them, has already woken up and they've made a start. It's just otherwise impossible that you'd be doing this. So, as I've done on other occasions, I congratulate you heartily, everyone that's listening. And I don't care whether this is your first foray into it or if you've been doing it for 50 or 60 years. If you're listening, um, you're a devotee, you're a seeker of truth. I love you dearly. Krishna states clearly in his teachings that he loves you dearly. And I'm sure you love them dearly, Jacqui. And so we all love each other dearly. So let's finish off on making sure we're very, very clear on that.
Beautiful.
So he continues on then, Krishna, by saying that the wise understanding that I'm the source of all, and from me everything flows. So there it is in a nutshell, Jacqui and listeners. I'm the source of all, and from me everything flows. Yeah, I've got diagrams in the book. It says the source up here, and then everything down, including the creation and us in it as human individual beings. Everything in the creation, whether it's in that astral realm, guardian angels, archangels, lords of the universe, all of these sorts of names, it doesn't matter. They're all under its control, under it, and it's the source of all. All right. And so he says, continue to increasingly love and worship me with unchanging devotion. By identifying with Brahman, their minds concentrated on him, they go about their lives operating from their high nature, seeing me in one another and hearing and talking about me exactly as we're doing in these podcasts, Jacqui. Okay, so he's just saying, um, you know, don't worry about, I don't identify with Brahman every inch of the day. As soon as I wake up, I say, I want to identify with Brahman. You made reference to this a week or two ago, Jacqui. It's not meaning that at all. It's just meaning keep your desire. Listening to these podcasts, you're all identifying with Brahman. Yeah, the fact we're talking about it now, everyone's identifying with Brahman. You're not sitting back saying, I'm identifying with Brahman. But in essence, that's what's happening, isn't it? So identifying with Brahman covers all sorts of realms. you observing that example you shared with us at the start, Jacqui, was identifying with Brahman. You're operating from your Brahman-like aspect, yeah, your Buddhi aspect. All that all right?
Yes, it is.
And he says, if you're doing this, aiming towards me, wanting to understand me more, wanting to know me more, wanting to meditate on me, devoted to me, they sound big terms, but if you're on your journey, that's what you're doing. Yeah, don't get too hooked up on it. And he's saying that thus they enjoy greater fulfillment, happiness, and contentment in their lives. So in the end, folks, that's the main criteria for you. If you're feeling, because of the work you're doing in your spiritual journey, either on these podcasts or anything else you've done in your life, you'd be aware that that's all of that's making you happier and more content and peaceful in your life. You might all be thinking, I've still got some work to do, and that's good if you're thinking that, because otherwise you might be kidding yourself. But that just means, yeah, well, just keep on going. Keep doing the work. You've already done a lot. You've already got a long way, and you're reaping the benefits of it. Look at it very positively, that if you keep doing, it's only going to get better and you get more benefits. So it's a win-win situation, Jacqui and listeners. No one ever loses in this game. Once you start on your journey and your progress, you're a winner every day. Even if sometimes terrible things happen, but they're happening in the world, aren't they? It's how you react to them all. That's the important part. So he goes on to say, and this is the part I wanted to, that I said I'd get to later on, Jacqui. To the seekers, steadfast in love and service to me, I give spiritual wisdom. And he says, this is how he gives spiritual wisdom. I give them buddhi. Right, Jacqui? Buddhi. That's the highest part of our being that I've been stressing a lot in all my talks. So for people, that lady who wanted to know more clearly about buddhi, and there's other people I know, it's a difficult concept, but this is how he gives the spiritual wisdom. It doesn't come from your intellectual aspect, Jacqui. Yeah, it doesn't come from your emotions. Oh, I love everyone and I'm going to be kind and that. Spiritual wisdom's behind it, but that's not buddhi. Buddhi is the power to discriminate between what's real and what's unreal, or what's true and what's not true. The mind and the emotional part of the being cannot do that, listeners. It's only the buddhi that can do it. And then the buddhi, through its wisdom, guides the mind and the emotions to act in a spiritual or a wise or a true manner. But those two can't do it. Only buddhi can discriminate. So the buddhi is the highest part of our being, listeners. Try and get used to even just saying the word. It's a better, stronger word to use than higher self. But that's up to you. But by separating it, it should help make it clearer in each person's knowing that that's it's a special segment of the being, and it's the most important segment of the being. Your body's the grossest part of the being. It's comes and goes, dies. Your subtle aspect, your computer program, that continues on. So that's a working component, and that's important. And that's what we're constantly changing, trying to change. And your divine aspect is always your divine aspect, never born, never dies, and not involved in anything. So the more we understand these components, and in that working component, the buddhi sits on top. Buddhi, ego, mind, emotions. Okay.
And Atman, just to bring that into context here, because I know we touched upon that the other week.
Yeah, for me, Atman is the soul. That's the part above buddhi. So soul's your true nature, but soul's like consciousness. It doesn't do anything. So you can't ask your soul, give me some guidance or advice. Your soul is your life force. It's your consciousness in you, like electricity flowing into a house. and then you've got computers, or you've got ovens, or you've got fridges, or you've got washing machines. It powers all those other components. But it's not the dishwasher, your soul. It's not the TV set or the computer. It just allows you to be able to use all of those sorts of things. Very important part of our being. It's our true nature. But there is a difference between you. And on my diagram that I show often, Jacqui, and you've got the book, there's arrows going from buddhi into soul, and they're both coloured the same, and consciousness on top, yellow, 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 or light, light, light. Okay, but we'll touch on that again in coming weeks. So he says, so buddhi is deep within them. This is beautiful. Thus, from deep within them, I light the lamp of wisdom and dispel all darkness, that is ignorance, from their lives. So buddhi is your light of consciousness, and it can dispel all of the ignorance of the ego and the mind and the emotions and the senses and the body. So it's a very powerful aspect of our being. We need to understand it more clearly and use it more regularly, more often. Very powerful words, Jacqui, I've written here, and I'll continue on, so I'm nearly finished. The emphasis switches now from Krishna teaching Arjuna about the divine manifestations of Brahman throughout the creation and how we can unite with him, to Arjuna now with increasing understanding and in total awe and great excitement, pleading with Krishna through a mixture of statements and questions, asking, which is where I think a lot of our listeners would be, Jacqui, how does Brahman pervade the world? Yeah, we're talking about it, but you're more curious to still know more. But how does one know Brahman? Truly know him, which is through a spiritual experience and connection. And interestingly, I've got Krishna remain silent while Arjuna is saying this, because it's like when we're contemplating on something. He's really talking to himself, Arjuna. How will I connect with Brahman? How can I recognise where he is, and so on? So he's pondering on what he's learning and trying to get his head around it. Lost the page here. So as we often do when we're contemplating something and we throw it around in our mind, looking at it from different angles, getting different answers, and so on, trying to get greater clarity. And this is what we're doing, Jacqui, in these podcasts. This is what the listeners are doing, listening to the podcast, all wanting to get more certainty, more clarity, more understanding, so they can continue on their journey. And so he finishes off by saying, dearest Krishna, you're the Godhead, the Supreme Presence. In your visible form, I can see you as everything in the entire creation. In your invisible form, you exist as the eternal divine self, the primal God, the eternal home, the unborn, the omnipresent. So Arjuna is now starting to recognize us as well. We're Arjuna. These two ways of seeing consciousness, just through everything in the creation as a manifestations of it, and even a greater awareness that you can't see the Supreme Presence, the Godhead, the eternal home, so on, but you're connecting with it. You can start feeling it, you're understanding it to some extent or other, so you know it's there. So that's a big awareness, isn't it? And he says, the great seers and sages have said this, thou thyself sayest it, and O Master, how shall I by constant meditation know thee? What are your various manifestations through which I'm to unite with you? So Arjuna's request to finish off such detailed descriptions indicate a student's earnest desire to learn, to understand. This is all of us, Jacqui, our listeners and so on. We've all got a earnest desire to learn and understand. As an individual gradually tires of materialistic and sensual living, he experiences greater bliss as he progresses on his spiritual journey. And I'm sure everyone can relate to that, Jacqui, to some extent or other. And he starts to taste the nectar of the Lord. and I've written in to finish in next week's concluding podcast on chapter 10, we'll hear what the Blessed Lord said to him in regards to these questions. All right? And just to finish
Beautiful.
off with the exercise, so I made the reference earlier on, Jacqui, and stressed it that it'd be part of the exercise, and I'll just reread the 2 lines. Through greater wisdom, a person doesn't see a different world. He simply sees the world differently. So listeners, your exercise for this week, and I know many of you are doing it and look forward to it, and that's very encouraging indeed. I want you just simply to do some self-evaluation. Tick a couple of boxes for yourself. And I want you to focus on what we've discussed today. Do you see yourself differently now, as say even differently to when you first started listening to these podcasts? Or do you see yourself differently now and over the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, however long you've been on your journey, and see some changes that are taking place within you and how you're seeing yourself and how you're seeing the world? And do you see the world differently? So just like you said in that beautiful observation at the start, Jacqui, when you just saw this unfolding in the office or supermarket or wherever it was, you mentioned clearly how you saw it all playing out. Well, that's how you're seeing the world differently. Yeah. And it all comes about through new knowledge somewhere along the way, not just on these podcasts, but accumulation. It'll be of everything you've read and studied and retreats you've been on, same with all the other people. It all accumulates and accumulates and makes a bigger river, all little tributaries running into it, and we become a powerful unit moving through the creation. All right, Jacqui?
Beautiful. Wonderful. Well, thank you for the sentiments. I'm sure I'm thanking you on behalf of everybody. A lot of useful gems in there. All right. Goodbye, everybody, and we will see you next week.
Bye, everyone.